Hello everybody, in today's video we're going to be going over some severe weather which is going to be covering a good portion of the central and eastern United States over the next 5 days. We already have an enhanced risk out for tomorrow in parts of Oklahoma, Arkansas, Missouri, Illinois, and some of the surrounding areas. And then we have a couple other areas of slight risk which have been put out over the next 4 or 5 days. So we're going to be timing this out for you guys and just giving you a good idea of when to expect this severe weather. Let's get right into it, and let's start off with your current National Weather Service page. We have some high wind watches up in that darker, almost gold color for parts of Nevada and Utah, as well as for a little bit of Oregon and Washington. We have wind advisories and high wind warnings scattered throughout the Northwest. And then we have some flood watches in the green color for Northern California, with some winter storm watches up for a little bit of the Sierra Nevadas, as well as for central Idaho. And then I believe that's a winter weather advisory in northern Washington. Other than that, we don't have many other watches or warnings currently in place. Yesterday, we had a high temperature of 96 degrees in Zapata, Texas, and Falcon Lake, Texas. So both of those towns are in extreme southern Texas, right along the border. The low temperature yesterday was 11 degrees in Antero Reservoir, Colorado, and then the highest rainfall report was in Leggett, California, where they got 4.88 inches of rain, and there were no snowfall reports yesterday. By the way, if you have any weather photos that you want to send in that you've personally taken, send it over to this email address right here, or it's also in the description down below, and I'll definitely be more than happy to feature you in the beginning of the video. So if you have any cool weather photos, especially if it's anything like snow, ice, some cool fall foliage pictures, even if it's just a cloud that you see that you like to you would like to share, send it over to that email address, and there's a pretty good chance that you'll be featured. If you have any video ideas, so if there's a storm that I still haven't covered and that you want me to cover, then just be sure to leave a comment down below, and there's a fairly good shot that when you put up that comment that I'll see it, and then I'll make a video on that. That actually happened yesterday, where the night before, somebody commented about the storm in the west, and I originally was not going to make a video on it because I didn't know how much interest there was in that, but it turns out that there was some interest in it, so I ended up making yesterday's video about that storm. So there's really a fairly good shot that if you ask me in the comments, that I'll probably make a video regarding that topic. So let's start off with the Storm Prediction Center page. This is for today. Now, today we're not really going to have too much in the way of severe weather. We have a little slight risk up for Kansas, Missouri, Nebraska, and Iowa, but in reality, I'm not seeing too much to indicate anything that strong so far. So today really isn't going to be the bulk of when you see the severe weather. It's as we get into tomorrow when we see that enhanced risk up for parts of Illinois, Missouri, Arkansas, Oklahoma. This is when we could definitely get a little bit more into the stronger storms. So I think for tomorrow, and then also for Monday, is when you want to pay attention for storms. Monday, it's going to be more focused in on the mid-Atlantic. We have a slight risk also up surrounding the enhanced risk, and that covers a good portion of the Mississippi River Valley, and then even through parts of the Central Plains. So a fairly good chunk of the central U.S. is under at least a slight or enhanced risk for today. And then if we move this on to Monday, you can see that we do have a slight risk up for parts of the Mid-Atlantic. That covers parts of Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Tennessee, Kentucky, Virginia, West Virginia, and Ohio. I would not be surprised if maybe by tomorrow they'd extend that maybe a little bit closer to the coast. So I would say maybe for parts of the coastal Mid-Atlantic as well. I'm not 100% sure on that because there is still some discrepancy on whether that'll actually happen within some of these models. But I definitely would not rule it out that they add, let's say, some areas of Maryland, Eastern Virginia, Delaware, North Carolina into that slight risk, especially considering that we're still on the day 3 outlook. So it doesn't look like we still have a couple days before they put out their final their final outlook for this event. If we move this on to the day 4 outlook, this is a completely different storm, but we do have some severe weather into the central and southern plains from Texas all the way up to southern Nebraska. We have a slight risk or 15% risk of severe weather, and this would be for Tuesday. And then if we move this on to Wednesday, which is the day 5 outlook, you can see that we have a 15% slight risk of severe weather, which is up for parts of Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and the panhandle of Florida. This would be for Wednesday. We're only going to cover the storms that go from the Mississippi River Valley to the Mid-Atlantic for today because we don't have many good severe weather models that go out past 4 or 5 days. So we're only going to focus on the next 3 days in today's video. But if anything really big happens with these 2 areas of severe weather, then I will surely put up a video on that within the next couple of days. So I just don't want to make a video too early on these areas just because it's kind of misleading if I make a video 5 days out on a severe weather event, because severe weather is really something that you can really only forecast within 72 hours. So I don't want to make something too early and have it actually end up being a little bit more inaccurate. Let's take a look at the simulated radar. This is from the NAM model, and we're going to time this out for you guys. So we have your low pressure, which is centered in Kansas, but you do have a stalled front, which is right here. So we have your cold front, which is going down like this, and then we have a warm front along the top. So your storms are going to start up along that warm front. And you're actually going to see when we look at the temperature map that there is a huge difference between northern Illinois and Iowa compared to the temperatures in Missouri and southern Illinois. There's going to be a huge difference once you get north or south of this thunderstorm line. So you get north of these thunderstorms and it's going to be mainly just rain, nothing really that strong. But you get further to the south and you can see the convective activity. We're looking at about a 15 or 20 degree temperature difference. So that is definitely going to have an impact on how these storms develop. It will be windy as well, so especially in the southern and central plains, I would watch out for some brisk winds, and that will definitely make it feel a lot chillier than it actually is. Probably it'll feel 10 degrees or so colder than what the actual temperature is outside, so that is something that you want to pay attention to. If you live up in North Dakota, you could see maybe a little bit of snow, especially in the western part of the state. I'm thinking this is going to be pretty wet snow, so only about half an inch to 2 inches at most is expected to accumulate, but it is snow nonetheless, so that would be interesting if that actually does end up happening. If there's anybody from that area and you end up getting snow, feel free to send in that photo, and I'll feature you on the weather photo of the day, because that would definitely be interesting. I think that would be probably the first snowfall photo that we would have gotten of the year so far. So I can't wait until we get into the colder action once we get into the snow and the cold, because it does get a lot more interesting with the snowfall, and I'll finally be able to put up some more snowfall maps, and then also it is just more interesting, at least in my opinion, in the wintertime as regard to this, in comparison to the summertime with the weather. So I just personally find the winter weather to be a lot more interesting to track than the summer and spring weather especially. Now, moving this on to Sunday night, you can see that we still do have some severe weather, especially for parts of Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois. But notice that there is a sharp decline as you get further north. So northernmost Indiana, northernmost Illinois, Iowa, probably not dealing with that much in the way of severe weather, but you get just maybe a few dozen miles further south, and you're dealing with a fairly convective band of severe storms. So this is going to be a localized event that will have a big difference on the temperatures, especially. If the temperatures are maybe a few degrees warmer, then this line could definitely move a little bit further north. If they're a few degrees colder, we could see this line maybe be pushed down into central Illinois and Indiana. So really, there's a lot going into this forecast, and there's a few variables that could definitely change it on either direction. If we move this on to very early Monday morning, the low pressure is now starting to pick up speed. So you're going to start to see this move in more of a vertical motion instead of the horizontal way that it was moving originally. So we have this low pressure here. You're now starting to see that cold front really develop quite nicely. So you have some storms along there, still very windy in and around the low pressure center. So if you live generally within this area, you're going to have some fairly strong winds. Now, it'll feel nice if you live out ahead of the system. So if you live in this area, you're going to have a nice southwesterly breeze with some warmer wind coming in. But if you live, let's say, in Missouri, Kansas, you're going to have a northeasterly wind, or in some areas, northwesterly wind coming in. So it's going to feel a lot colder. So it's really going to, the wind direction is going to have a big factor, is going to be a big factor into how cold it actually feels in your area. Now, Monday morning, we're now starting to see these storms die down a little bit. So it is weakening, and that's mainly because we're going overnight. So now this is Monday night into Tuesday morning, and you can see we're not really dealing with that much severe weather, but you're going to see that as we get into Tuesday morning, we're going to see some of those Cape values rise up. So the amount of energy is going to go up. The dew points will rise. The temperatures will rise. So we're going to see all of those ingredients get a little bit more favorable for severe weather. And because of that, we're actually going to start to see some of those severe storms fire up by Tuesday, especially. So you can see the severe weather. This is by Tuesday morning around 7 a.m. or 8 a.m. Eastern time. And you can see we have generalized thunderstorms along the coastal northeast and mid-Atlantic. That storm is just pretty much going to stay there, and you'll have rain, mainly just rain, nothing really too convective as we get into Tuesday, and that'll even linger into Wednesday and maybe Thursday morning for a few of these spots. So here's the high temperatures, and again, here's that really huge, stark temperature differential within just a few miles. So we're looking at maybe at most, I would say that's 10 to 20 miles, and within that 20-mile radius you can go from northern Missouri, which has a temperature of about 75 degrees, all the way to southern Iowa. So that's a few dozen miles there, a couple dozen miles, and you're looking at temperatures that are now down into the mid 40s. So you're looking at 75 to about 45. That's 30 degrees within a fairly short distance, and this will cause some instability. So you can see that there is a much less favorable pattern for severe weather just north of that warm front. Now, to the south of the warm front, in between the cold front and the warm front, is where you're going to have that prime zone for severe weather. And in this case, that's going to end up being over Arkansas, Missouri, Illinois, Iowa. So that's where we're dealing with the majority of the actual severe weather with this event. Now, if we move this on to Monday, you can see we don't have that stark of a difference in the temperatures, but by this point, we're dealing with the severe weather into the northeast and the mid-Atlantic, and you can definitely see that we have temperatures that are warm enough there. We're looking at 70 to about 75 degrees over a lot of these areas. You get further inland and you're into the 60s, but still, even 65 degrees is viable for some severe weather. And then by Tuesday, we see those temperatures rise up into the central United States. So you could see parts of Colorado, on eastern Colorado, getting up into the 80s, and then in the western half of the state, maybe down into the 30s. Colorado is also always an interesting place, in my opinion, when you look at the temperature maps, especially because you can see some days where the eastern half of the state, the eastern sliver of the state, is really, really warm. And then you look at the western half of the state where it's a lot rockier and a lot more mountainous, and you can see temperatures into the 30s. So I always find it fun to look at the temperature map, especially over Colorado or a state like Wyoming or New Mexico, because there's always a big divide in terms of the temperatures. You can see that big rise into the central plains, and that's going to be a sign that we're dealing with some severe weather. But we also have some colder temperatures into the east by this point as well. So by Tuesday, it is starting to cool down a little bit into the eastern half of the country. If you look at these dew points, there's also going to be a sharp divide here as well. So you're really going to need dew points above 60 degrees to get some good severe weather. And by this point, that would only be areas that are south of that Iowa border. So pretty much from the Iowa border, and if if you were to kind of draw a horizontal line, if you live south of that line, you have a fairly good shot of seeing some severe weather. If you live north of there, I would say your chances really do decrease because of how stark the difference on either side of that line will be. Now, if we move this on to Monday into Tuesday, you can see that we have those higher dew points up for the coastal Northeast and Mid-Atlantic, so they could definitely be dealing with some severe weather in those areas. And if we look at the Cape values, these will also be fairly high, especially for Missouri and Kansas and southernmost Iowa, so you could see something fire up here. If you don't know what Cape is, it's convective available potential energy, which generally it's just you really want to have that above 500 to see some good severe weather, and in this case we do have that over a good portion of the central United States. If we move this on to Monday into Tuesday, you can see that we have high enough values. These aren't going to be huge. They're not going to have a ton of energy to work with here, especially considering that we are in late October, so we're not supposed to be dealing with severe weather at this point. We're actually supposed to be dealing with more cold air, but in this case we really don't have that. I'm not sure why, but in October it's been really mild. It looks like November will be quite considerably chillier, even if November ends up being just normal in the eastern United States, where your temperatures are right at average. It's going to feel a lot colder for many folks because you're used to having the temperatures 10-15 degrees above normal, which is what it's been for much of October. So once you get a day where maybe it's just right at average, maybe it's just a couple degrees below average, you're really going to feel it. So this November, I think, is going to feel a lot colder than it actually is, because a lot of people are going to be adjusting to actually having to deal with some of the cold air, since we haven't really had any of that to deal with over the past month or two. So that's going to be definitely something interesting to track. You can see some marginal amounts of Cape riding up the East Coast, but again, nothing really that significant. If we move this on to Wednesday, just to give you a glance at what we're expecting in the Central Plains, you can see that we do have some amount of Cape, but at this time of year, Cape really isn't the best determiner of what's actually going to happen. I would look more at the temperature and the dew point. Those are the two things that I look at a lot more. Wind shear is also going to be important, especially if you're dealing with an event that could produce hail or tornadoes. So that's also something that I look at in some instances. In some other cases, it's not really that important. So, for example, in the Illinois, Missouri, Indiana, Iowa severe weather scenario, I'm not really going to look at the wind shear for that. I might glance at it, but I don't really think it's going to be too impactful into what happens. But for the one in the Central Plains, that could definitely have more of an impact, because it looks like that could be more of a shear-oriented system where you do need some of the shear to balance things out, since you don't have as much Cape to work with. So there are some scenarios where you want to look at it, and it's really all going to be based on what type of system you're dealing with, whether the main threats are going to be tornadoes or hail, or whether it's more of just a heavy rain and flash flooding type of event. So that is going to wrap it up for today's video. Again, if you have any weather photos that you want to send in, yesterday we had some beautiful pictures that were sent in from the Adirondacks in New York, taking some pictures of the fall foliage in some of those mountains up there. So really great pictures from there. If you have any similar pictures to that, or even if it's nothing as spectacular as that, but maybe just again a cool cloud, maybe you have a little bit of frost that morning, send those pictures in and I'll feature them at the beginning of the video. So that is going to wrap it up for today's video. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down below, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Goodbye.